Imagine looking into the eyes of a man who holds your entire retirement, your children's college fund, and the mortgage on your future, and feeling relief. That was Bernie Madoff. To the world, he was the grandfather of Wall Street, a beacon of composure in an industry fueled by chaos. His voice was calm, his suit was tailored, his smile, soft and assuring, told investors, "You are safe here." In the late 1990s, Madoff's private investment arm promised steady, market-beating returns. Not the sky-high crypto lottery gains of today, but a stable 10 to 12% annual profit, just enough to sound smart and reliable, just enough to bypass skepticism. Because the first rule of conning intelligent people is simple: never look like you're trying too hard. Behind the scenes, there were no magic algorithms or secret stock-picking strategies, just one account funneling money from new investors to pay off older ones, the textbook Ponzi. But wrapped in his aura of Wall Street legend, no one cared to ask where the returns truly came from. The SEC investigated him twice, and both times, they backed away with nothing but polite confusion. After all, how could the chairman of NASDAQ be running a fraud? His charisma was not flamboyant. It was quiet, trustworthy, deadly. Because the true power of a Ponzi isn't in promising the impossible. It's in promising what sounds entirely reasonable from someone who feels inevitable. In the end, Madoff didn't just steal money. He stole reality. He replaced it with his own, one in which everyone believed his returns were proof of their intelligence, not his deception. Because the most dangerous scams aren't the ones that prey on your stupidity, but on your pride. Picture this. You're a wealthy doctor in New York. You don't have time to analyze stocks or read quarterly reports. But your private banker calls with a whisper only the rich get to hear. "We have a slot in Madoff's fund. Very exclusive. Minimum $2 million buy-in. Returns are solid and stable. No risk of volatility." Suddenly, it's not about money anymore. It's about status. Because if there's one psychological lever that Ponzi schemes yank with precision, it's exclusivity. Bernie Madoff weaponized this better than anyone. His feeder funds, third-party hedge funds and banks, were like velvet ropes outside a club. They made his strategy appear too elite for the average investor, despite the fact that anyone's money was good enough to keep the lie afloat. These feeder funds bundled millions from investors worldwide and funneled it straight to Madoff's account, taking commissions along the way. They never asked questions. Because why would they? Their clients were happy, the fees rolled in, and Madoff's calm presence at conferences reassured everyone that this was the best-kept secret of modern finance. Many victims never even wrote a check directly to Madoff. They thought they were investing with HSBC, Banco Santander, or Fairfield Greenwich Group. In reality, they were pouring life savings into a black hole wearing a $5,000 Brioni suit. When it collapsed in 2008, these feeder funds claimed ignorance. But ignorance wasn't the crime. The real crime was incentivizing blindness, profiting off mass delusion while pretending they were just middlemen. Because in the end, a Ponzi scheme doesn't just need a con man, it needs an entire choir of enablers, singing the same beautiful lie. Imagine your bank account growing at a steady, predictable rate every single month. No dips, no spikes, just an elegant diagonal line upwards, defying recessions, market crashes, and the chaos of global finance. Sounds comforting, doesn't it? That was Madoff's secret sauce: impossible consistency. His reported returns were so smooth, so mathematically flawless, that any junior analyst with a basic knowledge of volatility would raise an eyebrow. But here's where psychology kicks in, because humans hate uncertainty more than they hate losses. Investors don't dream of 400% overnight gains. They crave safety, predictability, and the promise that their future is already written in neat black ink. For years, Madoff reported gains even when the market was bleeding red. In the dot-com crash, when portfolios halved overnight, his clients still received their quiet monthly statements showing positive returns. It should have screamed fraud, but instead, it whispered reassurance. Bernie knows something they don't. Regulators missed it. Financial journalists missed it. The auditors, a tiny office in a strip mall run by a retired octogenarian, verified his billions without question. Why? Because his consistency played into a universal cognitive bias, normalcy bias. People believe what they see repeatedly, and when reality finally cracks, it's often too late. When the house of cards fell, it revealed the ugliest truth. These investors weren't just victims of fraud. They were victims of their own desire to avoid discomfort, to avoid asking the hard questions, to avoid learning the painful truth about how markets actually work. Because in finance, as in life, the promise of certainty is often the most dangerous lie of all. In a world of billion-dollar frauds, you'd think the Securities and Exchange Commission, the mighty SEC, would be the unbreakable firewall protecting investors. But Madoff's genius was knowing exactly how human psychology infected even the watchdogs meant to keep him in check. Between 1992 and 2008, multiple whistleblowers flagged suspicious patterns in Madoff's returns. The most famous was Harry Markopolos, a derivatives expert who sent detailed reports to the SEC outlining how Madoff's strategy was mathematically impossible. His conclusion was chillingly blunt. He's running a Ponzi scheme. He will one day implode. But every time the SEC investigated, they saw what they wanted to see. A respected former NASDAQ chairman with connections everywhere. Madoff's office lobby was adorned with plaques, industry awards, and photos with global banking leaders. His charm disarmed them. His reputation hypnotized them. Their due diligence was cosmetic at best. They asked for records, and he provided fakes so pristine they may as well have been printed by the U.S. Treasury. They asked for trade confirmations, and he buried them under forged paperwork. Each time, the investigators walked out satisfied, shaking hands with the man they were supposed to audit. Because here's the ugly truth about human nature. People rarely see what they aren't prepared to believe, especially when their careers, reputations, or egos depend on that belief. When Madoff confessed in 2008, the SEC's failure became a scandal of its own. But beneath the outrage was a darker realization that the institutions built to protect us can become blind when trust and status override scrutiny. Because in the end, there is no scam more perfect than one endorsed by those meant to expose it. Picture sitting at a gala dinner, surrounded by philanthropists raising millions for cancer research, educational programs, and Holocaust survivor funds. Now imagine that the man managing all that money, the man praised in speeches and honored with standing ovations, was funneling every dollar into a giant lie. Bernie Madoff didn't just target hedge funds and the ultra-rich. He targeted charities. For decades, organizations like the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity entrusted him with their entire endowments. They believed they were funding scholarships, trauma counseling, and survivor support programs. In reality, their accounts were empty promises, propping up the illusion for other investors. When his empire collapsed in 2008, these charities lost everything. Staff were laid off overnight. Vital programs shut down. Vulnerable people who depended on their aid were left stranded. Elie Wiesel himself, a Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate, later described Madoff as a thief, a scoundrel, a criminal. He said sitting in the same room with him felt like sitting with death. Why would a man already worth millions steal from cancer patients and Holocaust survivors? The answer is both simple and terrifying. Because he could. Because the psychology of greed isn't always about more money. It's about never having enough. Madoff's power was built on one unspoken truth of human darkness. People equate wealth with virtue. If he made so much money, he must be a good man. If he donates to charity, he must be honest. And so, the perfect predator wore the perfect mask. A philanthropist's smile, a moral man's words. But beneath it all was nothing but an endless, consuming void. Because in the end, a Ponzi scheme doesn't just bankrupt bank accounts, it bankrupts hope itself. Imagine raising two sons to become your protégés, teaching them everything you know about Wall Street, grooming them to inherit your empire, only for that empire to be built on lies. Bernie Madoff's family was his ultimate shield. His wife, Ruth, was the silent partner, living in penthouses and seaside estates, wearing the quiet elegance of old money. His sons, Mark and Andrew, worked at Madoff Securities but were deliberately kept away from the fraud. They ran the legitimate market-making arm, while Bernie orchestrated the Ponzi in a secretive back office known as the 17th floor. Clients visiting the office saw his sons at their desks and assumed everything was legitimate. Regulators saw a wholesome family business. It was the perfect illusion, a dynasty of integrity hiding a kingdom of lies. But when the 2008 financial crisis forced Madoff's hand, the fairy tale shattered overnight. Bernie confessed to his sons just days before his arrest. The shock destroyed them. Mark Madoff took his own life exactly 2 years later, on the anniversary of his father's arrest, leaving behind a young son. Andrew battled cancer for years before dying in 2014, convinced the stress of the scandal worsened his illness. Ruth Madoff, once the queen of New York philanthropy, was left in social exile, cut off from the fortune she believed was built on brilliance, not betrayal. Because in the end, Bernie Madoff's greatest con wasn't stealing $65 billion from investors. It was convincing his own family that he was a man worth loving, worth trusting, worth following. And when the truth came out, his kingdom didn't just collapse financially, it collapsed at the very foundation of what makes us human: our faith in those we love the most. Imagine walking past an exclusive club with a line of desperate hopefuls outside and a bouncer rejecting almost everyone. Now imagine that club is an investment fund, and the bouncer is Bernie Madoff. One of the darkest psychological manipulations Madoff employed was exclusivity. His fund wasn't advertised in newspapers. There were no flashy ads, no "join now" emails flooding inboxes. Instead, he turned people away. He made them beg. Clients often waited months or years for the privilege of handing him their life savings. In psychology, this is called the velvet rope effect. If something seems off-limits, our brains equate it with value. Madoff's aura of unattainability made even billionaires feel lucky to invest with him. It wasn't just about returns. It was about status. People bragged at galas and golf clubs, whispering, "I'm in with Bernie." Ironically, his refusal to take everyone's money was exactly what allowed him to take everyone's money. Because when humans see a closed door slightly open for them, they don't ask what's inside. They rush in, blinded by ego and the thrill of being chosen. When the collapse came, these same investors weren't just financially destroyed, they were humiliated. Because the truth was brutal, they weren't elite, they were bait. Their social circles became hunting grounds for Madoff, as each proud investor referred friends and family, desperate to share their exclusive secret, unknowingly feeding the beast that would devour them all. Because in the end, Bernie Madoff didn't build his empire by promising impossible riches. He built it by selling the most irresistible drug of all: the illusion of superiority. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, rehearsing a lie you've told for decades, knowing that within hours, your entire life will vanish. On December 10, 2008, Bernie Madoff sat his sons down and uttered words that ended an era of deceit. "It's all just one big lie." In that instant, the carefully woven tapestry of illusion began to unravel at terrifying speed. What triggered his confession? The 2008 financial crisis. Investors were pulling out billions in panic withdrawals, desperate for liquidity as markets crashed globally. But there was nothing to withdraw. Madoff's empire had no profits, no investments, only IOUs and forged statements. His sons immediately contacted their lawyers. Within 24 hours, the FBI arrived at his penthouse, where Madoff greeted them in his bathrobe and quietly admitted, "Yes, it's all true." For decades, Madoff had lived like royalty, private jets, oceanfront mansions, the respect of Wall Street titans. Overnight, he became the world's most notorious financial predator, handcuffed in a silent elevator ride to federal custody. The victims list was longer than anyone could imagine: movie stars, billionaires, Holocaust charities, small business owners, retirees with no pensions left. Psychologists later noted that Madoff showed no remorse. His greatest sorrow wasn't for the lives he ruined, but for his own downfall, for losing the worship, the power, the identity he built from nothing but other people's dreams. Because in the end, the day a Ponzi collapses is not just a financial event. It's the moment when human hope, pride, and greed collide into a single devastating truth: that we were not as clever as we believed, and that some illusions, once shattered, can never be rebuilt. Imagine spending your life as Wall Street royalty, only to end your days as inmate number C17-054. After his arrest, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. In 2009, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, a poetic number, ensuring he would die behind bars. But what's haunting is what happened inside prison. Reports say Madoff became somewhat of a celebrity among inmates at the Federal Correctional Complex in Butner, North Carolina. They called him the Wizard of Lies. He gave financial advice in the yard, lectured other convicts on market theories, and even mediated gambling disputes over football games. To some prisoners, he was a legend, the man who stole $65 billion without firing a shot. To others, he was just another con artist with a different hustle. But Madoff himself remained eerily composed. He reportedly told visitors he felt safer in prison than on the outside, where the hatred and threats were overwhelming. And here lies the darkest truth: Bernie Madoff never stopped believing in his own brilliance. Even after losing his freedom, his family, and his fortune, he clung to the one thing a con man can never let go of: the illusion of superiority. He died in prison in 2021, aged 82, after serving just over a decade of his sentence. Because in the end, Madoff's final chapter wasn't redemption or regret. It was the quiet decay of a man who believed he was untouchable, only to discover that even kings can be caged. Imagine looking back on your life and realizing that every decision you made, every investment, every plan for retirement, every dream of generational wealth was built on someone else's lie. That is the story Bernie Madoff left behind. His scam wasn't just numbers on paper, it was an infection of trust, spreading silently through families, communities, and entire generations. Retirees went back to work in their 70s. Charities shut down forever. Parents who once felt proud watching their portfolios grow were left with nothing to pass down except shame and debt. But here's the chilling truth: Madoff wasn't unique. The psychology that made his Ponzi scheme work still lives inside every one of us, the part that craves certainty over reality, that believes elite secrets exist, that wants to bypass risk with the illusion of guaranteed returns. And scammers know it. From crypto rug pulls to fake investment gurus on social media, the same blueprint continues. Promise consistency, create exclusivity, exploit human pride, repeat until collapse. Because in the end, Madoff's legacy is more than a cautionary tale. It's a mirror, a dark, honest reflection of how far we'll go to avoid the discomfort of financial reality. How desperately we want to believe there is a man out there, smarter, calmer, better connected, who will keep us safe from the chaos of the world. But no one can, because the greatest Ponzi scheme of all is believing you can escape uncertainty forever. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.